Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont and member of the Senate Budget Committee, is here to continue our discussion regarding the stalled debt talks. Welcome to the program, sir.
Good to be with you, Rob.
We began our last segment with Senator Grassley with the article from Politico, and want to do the same with you, sir. The first paragraph reads, the President Barack Obama on Wednesday lashed out at Republican congressional leaders for stalling during negotiations over long-term deficit reduction and avoiding hard but obvious choices about raising federal revenue. Is it fair for the president to blame just the Republicans for not being able to get the debt talks through Congress?
Significantly, yes. What poll after poll shows, Rob, is that the vast majority of the American people believe that this very serious debt crisis has got to be solved through shared sacrifice, that everybody has got to be in it together. What the Republicans are saying is, well, yeah, the rich are getting richer, the middle class is disappearing, poverty is increasing, but we don't want to ask the wealthiest people in this country. And when you have the top 1% only earning more income than the bottom 50%, gap between the rich and everybody else growing wider, what they are saying, no. Not only do we not want to ask the wealthy to contribute any more to deficit reduction, we want to give them more tax breaks. Rob, you got corporations out there in 2005, 1 out of 4 corporations in this country, collectively making over $1 trillion in profits, didn't pay a nickel in taxes. You have companies like ExxonMobil making billions and billions of dollars in profits in a given year, not paying a penny in federal income taxes. What the American people believe, what I believe, is that if we're going to solve this problem, the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations in this country have also got to play a role in deficit reduction, and it is grotesquely unfair to simply move toward a balanced budget on the backs of the elderly, the sick, the children, and the lowest income people in this country. I think what the Republicans are proposing is immoral. My criticism of the president, I've been very hard on the president. He has been much too soft on the Republicans. He hasn't taken the case to the American people and rallied the American people around what clearly they believe, which is the concept of shared sacrifice. So if you're asking me, do I think the Republicans are there protecting the wealthy and the large corporations against the best interest of the American people? I certainly do.
Well, the Republicans on both the House and the Senate side, including Senator Grassley, will say that the corporations in the United States already pay the highest corporate tax on the planet.
Not true. They're just playing with words here. You have a real tax rate, what we call an effective tax rate, what you really pay, and you have a nominal tax rate. Nominal tax rate could be anything. Nominal tax rate could be that you pay you're supposed to pay 99% of your income in taxes. What matters is what you do pay. So I have to disagree with Senator Grassley on that. The facts are very clear. When you look at the effective tax rate of what corporations pay, it's about average for the OECD. Furthermore, when you have, and I have a list of them right here, major corporations paying not a penny in taxes after making billions of dollars, not paying a penny in federal taxes, after making billions of dollars in profit, that is absolutely scandalous. You have a situation in the Cayman Islands, which is one of the major places where the wealthy and large corporations stash their money in order to avoid U.S. taxes. You got a building, one building, has 18,000 corporations. What do you think about that? One building, 18,000 corporations. Everybody knows that there aren't 18,000 companies in that building. All it is these companies are using the address of the building in order to pretend to be Cayman Island companies, and we are losing about $100 billion every single year in federal revenue. Republicans are protecting those special interests.
Yesterday, during his news conference, the president addressed Democrats, saying that they must agree to painful spending cuts. This is what he had to say. We'll get your response on the other side.
Democrats have to accept some painful spending cuts that hurt some of our constituencies and we may not like. And we've shown a willingness to do that for the greater good. To say, look, there's some things that are good programs, they're nice to have, we can't afford them right now. I, as Commander-in-Chief, have to have difficult conversations with the Pentagon saying, you know what, there's fat here, we're going to have to trim it out. And Bob Gates has already done a good job identifying $400 billion in cuts, but we're going to do more. And I promise you, the preference of the Pentagon would be not to cut anymore. because they feel like they've already given. So we're going to have to look at entitlements. And that's always difficult politically. But I've been willing to say we need to see where we can reduce the costs of health care spending in Medicare and Medicaid in the out years, not by shifting costs onto seniors, as some have proposed, but rather by actually reducing those costs.
Senator Bernie Sanders, what did you think about what the president had to say about spending cuts? And beyond defense spending, what would you be willing to cut in order to bring down the debt?
This is what I think, Rob. And I am a member of the Budget Committee, and I've been working very hard to come up with a budget that says, look, given the fact that we now have the most unequal distribution of income and wealth in the industrialized world, given the fact that the top 400 individuals in this country own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. What I think is we need to have a budget which talks about 50% revenue and 50% cuts. In terms of cuts, we have tripled military spending since 1997, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I can tell you that the people in Vermont want us to bring the troops home a lot faster than President Obama has talked about. You know, the president says, well, you know, some of his generals are not happy with cuts in the military. Well, you know, it's the way life goes. We are spending $700 billion a year on the military. We're spending $100 billion, you know, every single year on the war in Afghanistan. And we have got to start bringing those troops home. So my own feeling is, no, I am going to fight to protect working families and the middle class, who, as a result of the recession, are already struggling. Real unemployment today, Rob, is not 9%. It's probably closer to 16% when you look at people who have given up looking for work and people who are working part-time. So what I think we can move toward a fair budget which says to the wealthy and the large corporations, sorry, you've gotten hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks. You guys are doing phenomenally well, record-breaking corporate profits. You're going to have to pay. Say to the military folks, sorry, we are going to have to bring the troops home faster than you may like. Say to the military-industrial complex, we no longer need weapon systems that were designed to fight the old Cold War. And I think when you do that, and I'm not saying you don't make other cuts. I think there's a lot of waste in other agencies as well that you want to go after. But at the end of the day, our middle class and working class are really, really hurting. And I don't want to throw elderly people off of Medicare or kids off of Medicaid.
Give me an example of an agency where there's wasteful spending where you think there are cuts ought to be made.
Well, I mentioned the Department of Defense, which is rampant with...
Beyond the Department of Defense.
I think you can go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I think we can make Medicare into a more efficient... There's a huge amount of fraud that we are seeing in Medicare. We have documented it both in terms of some small-time operators ripping off the system, as well as a lot of corporate interests. I think if we are aggressive and effective, we can save substantial sums of money in those areas as well.
We continue our discussion regarding the stalled debt talks with Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont. The numbers are on the screen. The phones are lighting up. Our first call comes from Riverton, Wyoming, on our line for Republicans. Bonnie, you're on the Washington Journal.
Yes, sir. I am kind of disturbed because it seems to me like we talk about the American dream, and what do? You work all of your life, you try to make a living, and then the government takes it away from you? Why do they have to take it away from you? I pay so many taxes, it's unreal. And they want to raise my taxes when I get to retirement age. They want to take my benefits away. That's wrong. I think people need to stop spending and take care of their own business.
Bonnie in Riverton, Wyoming. Senator?
Well, Bonnie, here is the story. Bonnie, I agree with you that after people work their whole lives, contributed into Social Security and contributed into Medicare, that they have a right to keep those programs. And that is what we are fighting for. But Bonnie, when you hear some of my Republican colleagues say, well, they want to tax the middle class, or Bernie Sanders wants to tax working people, that is absolutely untrue. What I think, speaking for myself, is that when we have given $700 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%. That's the Bush tax breaks. When major corporations, in some cases, pay nothing in taxes. Bonnie, I got to tell you that if we are going to preserve Social Security, if we're going to preserve Medicare, if we're going to preserve Medicaid, if we're going to make it easier for middle class and working class families to send their kids to college, those guys are going to have to pay their fair share of taxes. But I have fought very hard, and I think many of my colleagues are, to make sure that working families who today are really stressed out economically, in many cases working longer hours for low wages, that we do not increase their taxes. In fact, in recent years, as you know, there's been a substantial reduction in taxes for the middle class.
Ralph in Syracuse, New York, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Ralph.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. I have a quick comment and a question for the senator. And I just want to say to Senator Bernie Sanders, I'm very proud of you. You're about the only senator left in this country that care about the little guy and the little gal. But I'll ask you the same question that was asked to Senator Grassley on the NLRB and Boeing. My understanding is that the NLRB has not even ruled on the case yet. It's still before the administrative law judge. And the question is, did they discriminate against union workers and their right to withhold their labor? I'll hang up and listen to your comments. Thank you very much.
Well, Ralph, I think your comment is right. We're still in the process, and the Republicans have jumped all over the NLRB for suggesting that Boeing may have discriminated against workers in moving their plant. I think let the process play out. I am a strong believer in the rights of workers to engage in collective bargaining. I think that's one of the reasons why, historically at least, until recent years, we've had a decent standard of living for working families in this country. And I am very opposed to those people who want to destroy the NLRB's ability to protect working people, and I think the Republicans in this case are trying to do just that.
Ronnie on our line for Independence in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You're on the Washington Journal with Senator Bernie Sanders.
Morning, Rob. And morning, Senator Sanders. I'm just curious about all this talk about the unions. You know, private unions have been moving their companies out of the country. Now we got Wisconsin, Scott Walker doing the same thing. They're basically trying to break the unions. What's going to happen if the unions go completely away? Or is the senators not going to be able to even protect the unions no more?
Ronnie, good question. I have one of the strongest pro-union voting records in the United States Congress. I believe that working people have the right to organize and have the right to engage in collective bargaining. And a lot of non-union people say, well, unions, it doesn't impact me. It does, because if union workers are able to get a decent wage, it raises the wage level and forces non-union employers also to pay a decent wage. I would suggest to you, and I think the facts are pretty clear, that what we're seeing in this country right now is the collapse of the middle class. We're seeing a significant increase in poverty, and we're seeing a growing gap between the very, very rich and everybody else. And there are a number of factors for that. One of them is that working people no longer have the strength to collectively negotiate decent wages. And furthermore, and equally important, they don't have the strength to prevent these large multinational corporations from shutting down in America and moving to China and other low-wage countries. I would tell Ronnie that in the last 10 years alone, 50,000 factories in America have shut down. Millions of workers have lost good-paying manufacturing jobs, and it is harder and harder in this country to buy products made in the United States. You're not going to have a middle class. You're not going to have a strong economy if we do not manufacture the products to a significant degree that we consume. So how you rebuild the manufacturing base, how you see workers being able to join unions is one of the great issues that we have got to deal with.
We continue our discussion on the stalled debt talks with Senator Bernie Sanders. Our next call comes from Fortuna, California, on our line for Republicans. Jacob, you're on the Washington Journal.
Yeah, Senator Sanders, how do you guys talk about rich CEOs? How about your pals in Hollywood like Lindsay Lohan and Alec Baldwin and Michael Moore? They're rich. Do you tax them?
Absolutely.
I got two more quick points. I have friends who make $250,000. They work their butts off in a restaurant, just those two in there, and they really work hard, and that's not and you want to tax them? And my third point is, how much money do you make off your book? I saw you promoting the other day. Do you tax yourself? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the plug on the book. It's called The Speech. It's about the filibuster that I did on the floor of the Senate in opposition to the agreement between the president and Republicans in December. And I would tell you that I don't make one penny on that book. All of the profits are going to go to charities in the state of Vermont, mostly for children. In terms of my friend Lindsay Lohan, in all due respect, I've never met Lindsay Lohan. She is not my friend. And when we talk about asking the wealthiest people in this country to pay their fair share of taxes, that's Hollywood, that's CEO executives, that is anybody who's making a whole lot of money. You know, here's the irony. You know, sometimes you go and you talk to very wealthy people, and they say, you know what, I'm doing phenomenally well. My income has gone up, but yet, what we should be clear is in terms of effective tax rates, and Warren Buffett makes this point. Warren Buffett is one of the richest guys in the world. And he says, maybe it's something a little bit weird when I, who am a multi-billionaire, end up paying an effective, a real tax rate that is lower than a policeman or a fireman or a nurse because of all of the breaks that the very wealthy get. So I have to say, yeah, I think in a democratic society where we're struggling to deal with the fact that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty among our kids, we got seniors in America who are going hungry, got middle-class families, can't afford to send their kids to college. Yes, I do believe that the wealthiest people, that millionaires and billionaires, should be asked to pay their fair share.
We've got a tweet from American Hero who writes, in order to achieve this so-called effective tax rate, it requires expenditures and job-killing actions.
Well, I know that's the Republican line as well. Well, we saw that movie before, Rob. That was the line for the Bush administration. And the Bush administration said, oh my goodness, if you're going to ask the wealthy to pay fair share of taxes, it's a job killer. In fact, what we'll do is give them huge tax breaks. And the rich were given huge tax breaks. So we saw that movie during the Bush administration, and at the end of those 8 years, we lost 600,000 private sector jobs. It was the worst economic performance in modern history for an administration. So we tried that. We gave tax breaks to the rich and to large corporations. The end result is our manufacturing sector ended up in China, and median family income went down by $2,500. Under the Clinton era, and I'm not here to say that, you know, during the Clinton years they were all golden. They certainly weren't. We actually, and I was in the House at that point, we raised taxes on the wealthy. That's what we did. You know what happened during that era? We created as a nation 22 million jobs. So the contrast between raising taxes during the Clinton era on the rich, creating 22 million, lowering taxes on the rich under the Bush era, losing over 500,000 private sector jobs, people can make their decisions.
On our line for Democrats, Deborah in Cincinnati, Ohio. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Sanders, the reason I was calling, I would rather for the Democrats to quit calling it tax breaks for the rich and call it an entitlement like they do for the low-income people, because it is an entitlement that the rich are getting and the low-income are getting. So would you please refer as an entitlement for the rich, for the subsidies and all the other tax breaks that they get?
Well, not quite sure I understand what you mean, Deborah, but what I can say is that the real story here in Washington, which the media doesn't really write about enough, is the incredible power of the big money interests, whether it is Wall Street or the energy companies or the military-industrial complex. You know, when people criticize me and others for saying we think the wealthy should pay their fair share of taxes, think about what went on in this country 3 years ago. Our friends on Wall Street, because of their greed, their recklessness, and in fact, their illegal behavior, I think a number of those guys should end up in jail. They plunged this country into the worst recession since the 1930s. 3 years later, after they were bailed out by the American people, these guys are making huge kinds of profits. CEOs are getting extraordinary compensation packages. Yeah, I do think, after having bailed them out, they should start paying their fair share of taxes. I think Wall Street owes the American people a whole lot. And before I vote to cut Medicare and Medicaid and education and nutrition and environmental programs, I'm going to ask those people to start paying their fair share.
Yesterday in roll call, on the front page, the chairman of your committee, Chairman Kent Conrad, put forth this debt solution, the AMT fix as a debt solution. They wrote that Senator Conrad said he believes that Republicans could be enticed to vote for controversial revenue raisers if Democrats promise to provide permanent relief from the alternative minimum tax, which for years has bedeviled both parties as they've watched the tax intended for the wealthy threaten middle-income Americans.
Well, you're right. I am on the committee, and I think Senator Conrad has done a very, very good job, and I'll trust his judgment on that. I don't know the answer to that. But I do know, as a member of the Budget Committee, I have been working very hard with Senator Conrad to see that we come up with a budget that is fair, that is much stronger than what the President is talking about, to be frank with you, and certainly tells the Republicans that, no, we're not going to move toward deficit reduction solely on the backs of the weak and the vulnerable. We are going to ask those people who have the capability, those people who are doing very well, to start paying their fair share. And that is what you will see in the Budget Committee's resolution.
The article goes on to say that offsetting AMT relief with revenue elsewhere could help generate the cash needed to reach an overall bipartisan $4 trillion deficit reduction goal, Conrad says.
No, Kent is a smart guy.
All right, we'll leave it there. Let's go to Rome, Georgia, on our line for independence. Glenn, you're on the Washington Journal with Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
Hey, good morning, Senator, and thank you for your service in our Congress. What I'd like to say is that we should keep all effective tax rates the same, get rid of all loopholes, even for the poor. That way everybody in America pays their fair share. I'll take your answer offline. Thank you.
Well, Glenn, I think we should get, one of the scandals of our tax system is, as everybody knows, it is enormously complicated. It takes, a PhD in tax returns to know how to fill them out. And everybody agrees that we need a lot of simplification. But I believe not that everybody should pay 12% or 15%. Frankly, I believe in progressive taxes. Let's be very clear. There are tens of millions of people in this country today who, as a result of the recession, they may have lost their homes, they have lost their jobs, they've lost their life savings. There are so many people in my own state of Vermont who are just really struggling, and that's true all over this country. So to say to those folks that your tax rate has got to be the same as the wealthiest people in this country, who of course will be paying more in taxes, but the same rate, is not fair to me. I agree with half of what you're saying. I believe in tax simplicity. I believe in doing away with all of those loopholes. But at the end of the day, I do believe that those people who have a whole lot of money, and we're seeing a great concentration of income and wealth in this country going to relatively few people, I do believe those people should pay their taxes at a higher rate.
Next up, Dallas, Texas. Rosa on our line for Republicans. Go ahead. Rosa?
Yes.
Go ahead. You're on with Senator Bernie Sanders.
Yes. I'd like to know why it is that they've quit giving the seniors their Social Security raises, or if we'll ever get them back. My rent is $600, and I only make like $700 a month. I have hardly anything to live on, and prices in the stores keep going up and up and up. Pretty soon I'll be lucky if I can buy cat food.
Well, was Rosa on the Republican line?
Rosa was on the Republican line.
Okay. Rosa, let me say this. Thank you very much for your statement. And you're speaking for a lot of people in my state of Vermont, a lot of seniors and people all over this country. What I want you to know is just a couple of things. I helped lead the effort in the last year, not once, but on 2 occasions, to say just what you said, that to tell millions and millions of seniors and disabled veterans in this country today that they're not seeing higher costs for their health care or their food is absurd. Yes, they do need a COLA. Now, what I fought for, and the best that I do what we did in the stimulus package, and get all seniors on Social Security and disabled vets a $250 check. I know that's not a whole lot of money, but it would help. I could not get, we ended up the last time I did, if my memory is correct, with 53 votes. I do not believe we had any Republican votes, or maybe 1 Republican vote. And that is what Rosa is saying. I want people to think about. That effort to put $250, not a lot of money, into the hands of seniors, many of whom are experiencing exactly what Rosa is experiencing, which costs approximately $14 billion. That's what we want to do. And yet, what Republicans are saying is, yeah, we want to extend the Bush tax breaks for $700 billion that go to the top 2%, but we can't help Rosa out with a $250 check. Furthermore, I have to tell you, Rosa, and I'm the chairman of the Defending Social Security Caucus, there is a huge effort on the part of Republicans and some Democrats, mostly Republicans, to ultimately make major cuts in benefits for seniors, raise the retirement age, or in some cases, privatize Social Security, all of which I think is unfair and a disaster and not needed, because Social Security today, despite a lot of misinformation that's out there, has a $2.6 trillion surplus, can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 26 years, has not contributed one penny to the deficit because it's paid for by the payroll tax. So, Rosa, pay attention to what's going on in D.C. and stand with us, those of us who are trying to protect Social Security and at least get seniors a nominal increase in their COLA.
Stephen Dinan has the off lead in this morning's Washington Times with the headline, GOP wants Senate to cancel vacation. Debt talks take more urgency. Your thoughts about staying through?
Man, you don't need any more urgency. This is really urgent. Let's be clear what's at stake here. You know, what's at stake is that, according to the Secretary of the Treasury, and whether he's right by a week or not, I don't know, in early August, for the first time in the history of our great nation, we may not pay our debts. Now, there are some people who say, well, they want more money to spend. No. It's like you went out and you bought a car, you went out and you bought a home, and you know what? When you do that, you got to pay. You got to pay your mortgage, you got to pay your car loan. This is what we are talking about. What happens if, because Republicans are intransigent, because Republicans are saying, and John Boehner, go through your newspapers, you have a quote from Boehner saying, we can't raise taxes. We can't ask the wealthy or large corporations to contribute anymore. What happens if we default on our debt? Well, the answer is nobody knows exactly because it's never happened. But clearly, in a very fragile world economy, at a time when we're trying, with not much success, to improve our own economy, this will be a disaster. This will, at the very least, substantially raise interest rates, which will be very harmful to our economy. So, bottom line is that we cannot default, in my view, and the bottom line to me is the Republicans cannot be bullies and say, if you don't give us everything, we're not playing.
In the article, it says, frustrated with his former colleagues in Congress, President Obama on Wednesday demanded they stay in town next week to work on debt negotiations and found unlikely allies in Senate Republicans who said they were trying to force their chamber to cancel a vacation and remain in session. Yeah. Would you be willing to go to your leader and say, you know what, let's put in with the Republicans
if it made any
and stay
sense,
here next week?
You know, if it made any sense, I would. But these are the same guys who walked away from the budget negotiations, aren't they? Mr. Cantor and John Kyle, they was part of the Biden negotiations. They got up and they walked out. So I think what you're talking about is a lot of flim-flam here. It makes, a good headline, I guess, in a conservative newspaper. Of course, I would be prepared to stay in it if it was meaningful. We have an enormous amount of work to do. We should be working 24 hours a day if it is meaningful. But when the Republican leadership says, no, we don't want to participate in the bipartisan budget negotiations, I think that does tell you something about where they're coming from.
Our next call for Senator Sanders comes from Diane on our line for Democrats in Moreno Valley, California. Diane? Let's move on to Gonzales, Louisiana. Dean on our line for Independence.
Hey, good morning.
Dean, thanks for waiting.
I don't normally vote Republican, but I am calling independent because of the way that I'm so disgusted in the way things are run right now. My point and my question is, you made a good point about staying, the Senate's trying to stay in session for vacation. Well, I work, and we didn't take a vacation this year. Gas prices, worrying about being in my mid-40s, about trying to save for my retirement and my insurance because companies are dropping their insurance and we're having to come out of pocket ourselves to pay for our own insurance. So my question is, why can't the Senate, congressmen, all of the government themselves if they were on the same retirement plan and health insurance that I was on, Social Security that I'm going to be on or may not be on at that time, I think that they would be able to come to a more reasonable and quicker solution to the problem instead of being on their own system where, you know, they're judging and passing judgment on us American citizens on a system that they don't even contribute to or have a part in. Thank you.
Dean, just to correct the record, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think it gets sent out occasionally through the internet. I am on the same Social Security system as you are. I contribute the same way that you contribute. I have Blue Cross Blue Shield, the same as your local postal person does. So does everybody on my staff. There's not separate programs for members of Congress. You know, and again, this issue of vacation and no vacation. Look, I'm prepared to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We got a huge crisis. If that's what it takes, it takes. But I think a lot of this is political puffery. People want to make a political point. When I go back to Vermont, you know what I do? I work. I listen to my constituents. We hold town meetings. I meet with people. I deal with local issues back home. So it's not a question of working here or working there. Would I rather be in Vermont next week than here in Washington, D.C.? I would. But I'm prepared to stay here if it makes sense. But when our Republican leaders are boycotting, the Republican leaders are boycotting bipartisan negotiations, I think it tells you a little bit about hypocrisy.
Next up is Ken in Mansfield, Ohio, on our line for Republican. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning. I was commenting on what the senator mentioned about unions. Now, unions were a great thing when the industrialists were overcoming the workers, and they made it rough on them. And then they got to a balance, and then it actually was a lot better then. And then when the unions got the power, they were like anything else or anybody else. Complete power has a tendency to run over other people. And then, like the auto industry, for an example, when they struck the auto industry and had 1 out of 3 there, and then when they got that accomplished, when their what they were to get, and then they went over and got a with the other two. The two then had to come along as the first one did. But then by doing this, they were able to have a lot more money per hour coming in. And you see what happened to the auto industry. So it'd be wonderful to have a balance here, because I'm for both sides. Because how can we have one side prosper without the cooperation of the other side?
Well, let me just say this, Ken. You know, I'm not going to tell you that every union decision or every union is perfect. That is certainly not the case. But I think when you look at the automobile industry, what you see there is over a period of time, workers fought very hard to get a decent wage. And what it is a middle class wage. What I worry about very much is a disappearing middle class. And as a result of unions like the United Automobile Workers and others, millions of people were getting, in fact, a good, solid middle-class wage so that they had a retirement benefit, they had decent health care, they could send their kids to college. You know, I grew up without any money at all in my family. I was the first, my brother and I were the first people in the family to go to college. But unions helped make that possible. What's happening now without unions is you're seeing more and more of the new jobs that are being created are minimum wage or very low-paying jobs. And as I mentioned earlier, in the last 10 years, we have seen median family income go down by $2,500, and millions of the jobs out there that our college graduates are going out and getting are not paying them a living wage. In fact, they're jobs that don't require a college education. So we have got to rebuild, in my view, the middle class. We have to rebuild our manufacturing sector, and unions can and must play a very vital role in that process.
Earlier in the week, two of your colleagues, Senator Lieberman and Senator Coburn, introduced a Medicare debt plan, and we want to show the folks a couple of the highlights, including increased eligibility from 65 to 67 over 12 years. Wealthy Americans pay 100% of premium costs, Part B and D. A unified deductible of $550 to replace cost-sharing requirement. limit the Medigap coverage and increase the premium from 25% to 35% of the program's cost, again for Parts B and D. It also, according to the CBO, would save $600 billion over 10 years, transfers $250 billion in savings to Medicare Part A trust fund, doubling its size, and reduces Medicare's 75-year unfunded liabilities by $10 trillion. Are you ready to support a proposal like this?
Not in a million years.
Why is that?
Because you tell people out there who are now struggling at 64, 65, guess what? You're going to have to keep working. You're not going to have any health insurance. So it's good to talk about saving money for Medicare. Who do you think is going to pick up the burden? What happens if I'm 66 and I have a heart attack and I have $8,000 in the bank, which many Americans have? Who's going to pay for it? What do I do? I think that is a preposterous proposal. I'll tell you what I do think, though. In my state of Vermont, I hope will lead the nation in that direction. Rob, the question that we have got to ask, it's not just Medicare, it's our entire health care system. In Vermont, people who are not on Medicare, small businesses are seeing 10, 15, 20% increase in their health care costs. The question that we have to ask as a nation is a pretty simple one when you talk about health care, Medicare and everything else. And that is, why is it that when we have 50 million people without any health insurance today, you have millions more who have high deductibles, high co-payments, don't get to a doctor when they should? When we have 45,000 people this year will die because they didn't get to a doctor in an appropriate time, why at the end of all of that do we end up spending twice as much as any other industrialized nation on earth for health care, and almost all of them cover all of their people? And the answer is we have an incredibly wasteful, bureaucratic system dominated by private insurance companies whose function in life is not to provide quality, cost-effective health care, it's to make as much money as they can. In my view, the solution to our health care crisis is a Medicare for all, single-payer program guaranteeing health care to all people. Study after study has shown that if you want to provide health care to all people, that is the cost-effective way to go. I hope my state of Vermont will lead the nation in that direction. But telling somebody who is 66 years old that they're not going to have Medicare, 67, that is, to me, beyond comprehension.
Back to the phones, Louisville, Kentucky. John on our line for Democrats. Go ahead. You're on the Washington Journal.
Senator Sanders, here in Kentucky, we know a little bit about handicapping, and I can tell you right now, as long as you have these lobbyists, the politicians, you have to, I don't believe in the word coincidence. And ever since in the last 10, 20 years, it costs so much money to run for office. And the lobbyists, they say the wealthiest counties are over in Virginia where all the lobbyists live. I don't see how things can change because these guys and gals that get elected are so indebted to lobbyists and special interests that they can't do what's right for America. In our trade policies, I was watching something the other day. China charges us, I believe it's 25% tax tariffs, whereas the products over here, our products, we only get 2%, and China gets 25%. So if you could address those two issues, the trade policies and special interest money,
John,
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for that excellent question, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. The reason that there are people seriously talking about giving tax breaks to billionaires and cutting Medicare and Medicaid and education has not to do with what the American people want. The American people in poll after poll overwhelmingly oppose that agenda. But it has everything to do with what John just talked about. It's the power of big money which surrounds Washington and all of the corporate interests, the Wall Street money, and all of their lobbyists. And as John indicated, increasingly, to get elected to any office, it costs an enormous amount of money. Where do you think people are going to go to get the money? They're going to go to the wealthy and the powerful. And then the wealthy and the powerful say, well, I've just given you $5,000. This is what I want you to do. Or Wall Street says, we bundled a whole lot of money for you. This is what I want you to do. And as John implied, that whole impact of big money certainly has been seen in our trade policy. Our trade policy is a total disaster. It is increasingly difficult to buy products made in the United States of America. I've recently been dealing with the Smithsonian Museum. It's a great museum. Go to their gift shop, but many of their products, majority of the products, are made in China and other undeveloped third world countries. in our own government-owned museum talking about American history. We had a little bit of success there in getting them to buy products made in America. But basically, permanent normal trade relations to China, the NAFTA agreement that was pushed on Congress by big money interests who had power over both political parties, the results are millions of jobs were lost in this country, factories shut down, moved abroad. So, John, I think that is a very good example of how big money was used to benefit large corporations and really punish working families.
Our next call for Senator Bernie Sanders comes from International Falls, Minnesota, on our line for independence. Go ahead.
Good morning. I hear a lot about the raising of the taxes or not raising the taxes, but I really truly believe that we need to learn about what has happened in our past. From 1940 to 1990, the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate, and at that time, they decided to put $30 to $40 trillion worth of IOUs in Social Security and Medicare, and today we have approximately $70 trillion of unfunded debt. Now the question is that why should we continue to listen to these educated idiots any longer, and that we shouldn't vote them all out?
Good. Well, John, the reason that you shouldn't vote everybody, and I hear that occasionally, is what is your point? What is your view? The point is you have to have a belief. Do you really believe that we should continue to give huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country? If so, vote for those candidates who believe that. Do you really believe we should have a trade policy which actually encourages corporations to shut down in America and move to China? If so, vote for those people. So it's not a question of throwing everybody out. There are people in Congress who have very, very different points of view. You have got to determine what point of view makes sense to you, support those candidates in Congress, outside of Congress, who reflect that point of view, oppose those who don't. But to simply say, oh, gee, I'm going to throw everybody out, I don't know that that makes a whole lot of sense.
Our last call for Senator Sanders comes from Fairfax, Virginia. Tom, on our line for Republicans. Go ahead.
Senator Sanders, thank you for your time. I wrote a statement here, and I'd like to get your views on it.
Tom, I'm running real short on time, so
I
if you can
believe
get to the
Congress
point.
is significantly underpaid. $166,000 to keep 2 homes, and it is impossible unless you're wealthy. I believe this is the root of our problem with Congress being open to big money influence. What do you think would happen if we paid Congress $500,000 a year?
I think people all over this country would go nuts. And I don't support that at all. But I think the problem is that the Congress today, for a variety of reasons, and it's not salary, it is the power of big money, it is lobbying, it is campaign contributions. I think a significant reason that we're in the hole that we're in right now has to do with the influence of big money interests in this country. I believe that one of the ways out is public funding of elections and much strong legislation prohibiting the kinds of lobbying that we're seeing right now.
Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, thank you very much for being on the Washington Journal.
Great to be with you.
One of the headlines in Sunday's Washington Post, global diabetes rate soars, related medical costs, disabilities expected to escalate this century. Coming up after the break, a discussion of type 1 diabetes, also known as juvenile diabetes, and the role of biomedicine. But first, another news break from C-SPAN.